responsibility is put a PowerPoint together, and it's hard to do with the pipeline going out. So please forgive him of that. We are going to keep it to a tight schedule, 20 minutes for presentations, 5 minutes for discussion and questions afterwards, and 5 minutes for the next presenter to get set up. Scott Truex, Director of our Community-Based Projects and Professor in the Urban Planning Department, and I'll let him introduce the session.
Okay, thank you for joining us. The title of the session was Synergy and Community-Based Projects. I actually want to go quickly, just give you a quick explanation about what community-based projects, but I really want to build upon what we just heard from Wes, and I think some parallel issues that Dr. John Motlock and I, right here, are working at in a different part of the world called Africa. And so let me first explain. Community-based projects was started by a faculty member here, Tony Costello, nearly 40 years ago as an outreach, and the culture that Wes was talking about that's been ingrained in here is how we as a college can be out and about and working in communities. CBP has had 4 primary objectives. The idea that students can learn so much more by being out and participating with community. And we just heard Wes talk about that. What an impact it can be for students to be out and learn from the community, because the community has so much to teach us that you won't find in a textbook, that you won't find in lectures that we provide. The other part of that is we believe that we have an equal opportunity to help empower people, educate them, and show them how they can also be engaged with us, teaching us and how there's value in what they know, and we should honor that, and it becomes, we believe, a two-way street in terms of that. There are technical things that we may know. Wes just talked about working on a joint that they saw that local masons were doing and how to make improvements. Obviously, we believe the value of the education, and we have to understand, obviously, cultural, the context, but there are ways that we can contribute, and the key is how that dialogue happens. And these are all part of the applied research. If we are going to be continually growing as a college, we have to continually be challenging that and bringing that back in the classroom and relating it. And I think, obviously, as Dean Guillermo had mentioned before, we are best at that. In many ways, what CBP program came about doing was helping to create images and vision and helping a community get organized. Probably the most important thing we would do in our small town work around Indiana was just getting a group together and having them reach consensus. The work we did was probably less important than the fact that they came together, they were empowered to make decisions, and our visions and the drawings and the things we teach were critical in terms of starting that. The challenge with all this is beginning to apply this in another context. Obviously, in an Indiana context, the culture that we're dealing with becomes very easy. But when you go to begin looking around and developing in other ways, even by going to Indianapolis and setting up the Indianapolis Center, that was part of the paradigm in terms of what we were looking at for community-based projects. And we've expanded that vision because we saw Indianapolis, because it's more urban, as an opportunity for our students to understand better what an urban laboratory and how we could build upon that. And obviously still serving as a community resource and becoming an advocate for design and what we do here in this college. Now that's going to seem very different in where I'm going to go with this presentation. And one of the things that sort of coming back on campus this last year that I've become very adamant about is how can we as a college become more proactive, especially in the context here in Indiana. How can we take the work that's done in the hallways that are just incredible investigations that need to be out and in the public and be seen in a way that can begin to influence things. One of the ways that we immediately began to look at that and launch was something called the Green Line. The idea of looking at how we could use, and you heard Craig Hartman this morning mention the role of transit in cities and the future of that, how critical it is for getting density and for changing the current systems of congestion in cities. So with Dr. Motlock, we initiated LDI and Community-Based Project, the Green Line Initiative, which last fall looked at a variety of studios, lectures, and so on, looking at the idea of our college becoming proactive, the idea that the work we do here has to be pushed out there, we have to challenge. Every one of the guest lecturers that came to speak in that also spoke at the state legislature to legislators. They also spoke to community leaders. They were involved in meetings. We need to get this work out here and have an influence, not just keep it to ourselves, but use this in a way that challenges where we're going as a community, as a state. Now, I totally want to switch gears and look at a project that came about 4 years ago. A group in Indianapolis, folks from Cameroon, Africa, formed something called the African University Foundation. This was a group of Cameroonians led by a gentleman who actually came to Ball State, got an undergraduate degree, went on to medical school, now teaches at IU's medical school in Indianapolis, but formed a foundation that was really concerned about higher education and education in Cameroon. They've worked through incorporating, creating a board of directors. Cy Reed here from Ball State was involved in that board and been very active. Cy took a new job as provost at the University of Cairo, which left an opening. They came to the college with the idea is we need a master plan for this campus. Maybe by default or whatever, I ended up having the opportunity to begin a conversation with that. And unfortunately, one of my faults is I say no to basically nothing, and I ended up being on the board and now being part of the African University commitment. What was obvious to me to the beginning, and again, I think this is what Olin just talked about, there was a disconnect. Here was a group here in America of Cameroonians who live here, who are dedicated to improving the quality of life of their village in Tally. But they were not, in a sense, their immediate reaction was to take all the expertise of the United States and apply it. They came to us and said, we want a master plan. We have 10 square miles of virgin rainforest, looks like that, and we want a campus. Can you show us where to clear and how to put up an Ivy League kind of looking school? Well, there was a great deal of pushback on my part. We could have done that on a design charrette and had it out in a matter of a day. That was not the issue. I've actually worked for 4 years trying to work with this board to change that paradigm and work with that. And Dr. Motlock, who's now become an integral part of that, has been working with me. So what I want to share with you is a process that we've been using to challenge this idea and how we can evolve this. For most of you, if you're not familiar, Cameroon, which is located here on the west coast of Africa, Nigeria, Ivory Coast, all in this area. This is Tally, the village that we visited. One of the first things that I insisted on is local people have to want this campus. I don't have any sense. I don't distrust the folks here, but there's a parallel board over there, and for me, I didn't feel like we could design something without going there, understanding it, and seeing how the people in Tally would participate in that. So we were able, through some friends in Indianapolis and some foundations, get funding so that Dr. Motlock and I could go on a visit to Cameroon in 2006. And so we visited, quite an experience. I've had the opportunity, and John has also in different parts of the world, but probably the most challenging road 6-hour drive of 100 miles was in Cameroon. And we'll show you some of the reasons for that. We wanted to plan a new vision and see if we could challenge this premise of us coming over and plopping down a Western University type into this village. So the first thing we felt we had to do was think broader in terms of this. What are the goals of this university? One of the goals that has been instrumental in the whole formation of this is the sense that a new breed of African leaders need to evolve. Africa needs to have leaders that can take over control of Africa. If you know anything about the history of Africa, the Western cultures and colonizing has just devastated and dominated Africa ever since we started moving in and taking resources out of Africa, whether that be oil now, whether that be diamonds, whatever that might be. But the idea was there's a new generation of Africans that have to be prepared. That's more important than the actual discipline that comes out of this university. They have to have this sense that individuals in this university will learn how to be empowered. We also felt that it had to have a very strong community. And a word that John has introduced in this discussion is an eco-economic development. The idea that whatever this development happens, it has to be based on a regenerative model, not a consumption model. You heard Craig talk about that in terms of San Francisco and the efforts going on there. But this is the model we have to instill in everything we do, in my opinion, in this college. And that's very much been directed, my understanding of that, by the work John has been doing in Brazil and other places, which you'll hear more about. But the idea is we have to improve this quality of life to people, make them, there are obviously health issues, diet issues, other kinds of things that result in this area. So we looked at it by visiting, we could begin to have a better understanding. We saw incredible things they're doing. What is amazing, if you have the opportunity to travel to a country that is, as in our terms, developing, you'll find several things. Great ingenuity. People being able to take very limited resources and turning them into something they can use. Really a sustainable model that puts us to shame in terms of all our waste and the things we do. So you see great ingenuity, you see great ability to adapt and learn. And so when we go over there and we began to work with this, we began to try to observe what people were doing. This was a shot of some of the yams that they grow wild and how it's part of the food source. We began to see, again, this micro business, what people would be doing to try to create. So there wasn't any, maybe a business school could learn from the ingenuity that was going on already. How do you capitalize on what's there and improving the lives without changing that culture, without being able to destroy the natural resources? So we went, again, our trip was as much about being taught and understand what goes on locally. So this process of looking at that, the people of Tally were incredibly hospitable. They welcomed John and I. I do not have the video of the dances we did with the tribe. John and I have burned all of those, and we've made sure they'll never show up on YouTube because even our wives have not seen those dances. But the idea is, as we began to learn and see things, we saw certainly the fact that there was a shortage of resources that are there, available to people. There wasn't a shortage of opportunity, but there's a shortage of resources that become available to folks in this village. The model we've decided to build upon, which has been, again, a struggle even with our board here, is saying this university has to be a living laboratory. We want the university to be built out of all the materials locally. We want to take advantage of the skill sets that are there, what people know how to build and do, and build a university unit. We want to introduce some different approaches in systems that are about sustainability, integrated systems. But the idea is, instead of bringing in a faculty, an international faculty to school, we want to, in the process of working with this community, having them develop their own university that they have ownership and pride in, they will become the teachers in the university. Because if truly the campus is a living laboratory, if every one of the buildings that are put up are part of an ecosystem that are teaching how to take care of water, teaching how to take care of materials, looking at the whole systems approach that Dr. Motlock has been involved with, then the people themselves will become the teachers. They will become members of the faculty of this living. There will be no town-gown separation. It will be, from day one, the community will become the grounds for the college, and we'll be able to build upon that. That's the premise we've worked with. And believe me, that has been foreign to the board that we started working with. It's foreign to Purdue University when we went over to talk to them about being involved. We got laughed out of the room. The idea that why weren't we asking the big corporate agriculture groups to come in and take over? We explained a completely different model and went away sort of, I think, a number of jokes and things that we found out. We weren't even considered to be worth any of Purdue's time because we were not taking the big approach of the NGO coming in. So the idea here is as this university develops, sort of building system by system, It will become the model that we'll be teaching from. So as people come, not first from the village and learn about these systems and get involved in that, as others come around Africa, you would come here and literally live here and live with the community, and the university would evolve. Currently, there's great exploitation going out. Okay? These were some of the log trucks that we were following, that were leaving as we started the rainy season. We literally were in potholes that the whole vehicle would go down and come out. And as a result, our entire trip of 100 miles was spent doing nothing but moving back and forth, trying to avoid potholes, which was basically impossible. And as a result, we traveled more miles back and forth in a road than we did going down it. But these are the kind of things that are happening in the exploitation, resources being taken out that are devastating. And I got a few shots here, of course. As you can see with some of these vehicles, it becomes almost impossible to pass and move, thus a six-hour trip. So as we begin to develop this idea with the village, with the community, we've really slowed down the process. We were asked 2 years ago to have the master plan. But by the process we're using, our intention is, hopefully, if our funding comes through, we'll be taking a group of students over, possibly next spring, possibly next summer, on which we will be then building and engaging with this community, the first examples of this laboratory, the first examples of this university. We'll be able to then introduce some integrated systems approaches that some are already going on, but can be expanded and used in a different way. There's tremendous craftsmanship. There's tremendous skill sets already there. How do we capitalize that and use that local expertise in terms of creativity, design, and being entrepreneurial? So the process of this campus will be evolving over time, and I believe that the principles that we've tried to introduce will set it apart from the way most universities have been approaching. We've had opportunities to partner with other universities that want to sort of come in. We're even looking at possibilities of how we could use carbon credits in the Western world to pay for the development of this campus. We have 10 square miles of land that we ought to be able to capitalize on the carbon credits, that it is being able to preserve that rainforest and use that as a funding mechanism, have the West fund through the carbon tax the development of this campus. So this is an exciting project, again, that Dr. Motlock and I are involved in. I think he's going to go into the more detail about some of those systems and applications around the world that he's been doing in Brazil. But we think it's a great, we feel very privileged to have the opportunity to work with the people in Cameroon. And as I'm sure Wes and others who have traveled in developing countries, it's very humbling to be in these countries. And I've had the opportunity to work in El Salvador and other places where people with nothing offer you everything they have. The first example of that is when I arrived in Cameroon, I used my cell phone as my watch. I don't have a watch. And of course, my cell phone, Verizon hasn't made it to Tally yet. And as a result, we were discussing time, and of course, I was sort of clueless. The next morning I wake up, and one of the gentlemen, one of the younger members of our group, handed me a watch. He had went out and purchased a watch for me so that I would be able to know the time as we moved around. Now, that's a very humbling, because he spent probably 2 or 3 weeks worth of his salary or money he has to buy me a watch, which for me seemed like, you know, but that kind of attitude, that's what you face. And those are the kind of things, this stopping, waking up that we heard earlier. These are things that really become critical and humbling and make trips like this, I think, very exciting. So, how'd I do? Got a moment. Got 1 minute. So anyway, this is Cameroon, the Tally Project, and we hope, this is just a quick story. This is us walking back to the site. The chief had 8 guys with machetes clearing a path for a week so we could get back to see the 10 square miles. Okay? Unfortunately, it started to rain, and we got back to the edge, and there was now a river that we could not cross. I found it interesting. The chief, as we were leaving, told me, you know there's a game preserve next to our site. Do not worry, their elephants have not been seen for a long time, and I don't believe we've seen an elephant or a leopard for 6 months. I immediately asked the chief, the 4 guys with machetes, could I have 2 in front and 2 in back? Because I'd really like them to show me the way through this area. But that's the kind of hospitality and the joy of working in this, and we're pretty excited at what this will bring. So we'll take any questions at this point. Thanks.
We have a few minutes for questions. Anyone have questions or comments? So how do people get involved?
How do people get involved? Well, we will be assembling some opportunities for a similar field trip to Cap Asia and other ones to Brazil. Our intention is to take a team over and, again, spend some time in the village, working with the local folks, learning the materials they're using, possibly from some of the research we're beginning to do, try to introduce some other opportunities for materials, including some use of bamboo and other materials that currently aren't being used, but through some methods and technologies that John has experienced in other parts of the world. I think you'll hear from his talk how this will become part of actually a global connection of other sites in the world that their research is doing that will be critical to this.
And they should have some opportunities for students to get involved in those funded projects.
Good.
Anybody else? Yes.
Ted.
How long would it take to persuade or convince the Cameroonians involved in the project to take the particular resources rather than the original IPV model?
About 2 years, 6 separate presentations at the board meetings that I attend, gradually bringing in each some of these issues, bringing John in and showing how these ideas of sustainability and integrated systems are working in other parts of the world, going to Purdue and being rejected, which was probably the most valuable part of that, because William, the president, is trying to get IU, Purdue, and Ball State all involved. We certainly learned after the Purdue meeting that the scale we had been introducing, the Purdue folks probably reinforced the approach we had been advocating better than anything we had ever said, because they immediately reacted in the typical NGO sort of global agro-business approach to looking at this area. And so that was really helpful.
As a second layer of that answer, and Scott may want to comment on this, but as a second layer, what he's just talked about, I think, are the Cameroonian entity here in the States. When we went over to Cameroon and met with the Minister of Education and these kind of people, there's a lot of frustration in Cameroon that people get degrees and they don't have any jobs, and there isn't a local economy, regional economy that they find work. And so they were quite receptive within the country to new models for universities that could, instead of taking their resources and basically give them to global companies, would take those same resources and build their future with it in ways that regenerates those resources and at the same time creates a lot of local jobs and micro industries and all those kind of things. So I think it was easier for the Cameroonians in Cameroon to accept it than those that were here.
Yeah. You know, the impact of colonizing a country is suddenly all the universities became controlled by Western groups. And so if you were elite enough or able to get in that college education, your expectation was you automatically had a job. So the middle class, the business, entrepreneurial part is such a big gap in so many of Africa's countries, because it's been assumed that as the colonized country, all the businesses were controlled by that there was a sort of network that you just followed through. So now as these countries have been trying to have self-control and other things, there's this huge gap in this sort of entrepreneurial startup business opportunity. And so we've modeled this as one of the ways that we think this can begin to start building new opportunities for folks in Africa.
All right. Very good. Thank you very much.